Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're testing out 007 First Light. Uh, we're not just looking at the average FPS and calling it a benchmark. We're going to test the game across 5 different categories, and we'll start with raw performance first, and then we'll break it down to the other sections later in the video. So for raw performance, I'm testing the game at DLAA without frame generation, and everything is on maxed out. And honestly, the performance of this game on DLAA with preset L is okay. It's not that great. It is sub 80 FPS. I expected a lot better native performance in this game, as it is using Glacier engine. We've seen that engine before on Hitman, and Hitman games are really well optimized. For this game, we're running it on 1590, and considering 007 First Light is not using the full hardware ray tracing, it is mostly software based. I feel like the FPS should be much higher. This game does look good in some scenes, especially with lighting, reflection, and cinematic presentation, but graphically, I would not call it one of the most impressive games we have seen so far in 2026. That is where the performance starts to feel a little disappointing. If the game looked absolutely next generation, I could understand the heavy cost, but at 4K DLAA, I expected 5090 to push this game more comfortably, especially closer to or above 100 FPS. The average FPS is okay, but the bigger issues is 1% lows. As you can see, the 1% lows are sitting below 50. Another thing I noticed that this game kind of requires DLSS quality to play on high FPS. If you have a high FPS monitors, the DLSS quality definitely helps, but we'll talk about that later in the DLSS and frame generation section. But for raw performance, I don't want to give the game too much credit for needing upscaling to feel fast. Combat performance is also something to watch here. In some of the combat scenarios, the FPS does not gain much from the upscaling, which makes me think the game could have other bottlenecks or the areas that need future patching. The Hitman games scaled really well on PC and felt very polished for performance perspective. The 007 First Light is playable, but it does not feel efficient. And that is the key point for this raw performance section. I'm not saying the game is running badly, but I'm saying the performance does not fully line up with what I'm seeing visually. When a game is extremely advanced visually, I can accept lower native FPS because the image quality is clearly pushing boundaries. Visuals are good, but not unbelievable, so the performance target should be higher. This is also why future patching are going to matter a lot. If the developers can improve the 1% lows, reduce some of the heavier drops, and make upscaling better during combat, then the raw performance score should improve. But based on what I'm seeing right now, the game feels like it needs more optimization work before I can call the raw performance strong. For high-end users, the game is still very playable, especially once DLSS quality or frame generation is used. But for this section, I'm judging the baseline performance first, and for 4K DLAA with no frame generation, the baseline is decent. So for this section, I'm going to give raw performance of this game a 7 out of 10. It gets credit because the game is playable, the experience is not broken, and high-end hardware can still push it well. But it loses points because native 4K DLAA performance should be stronger on the RTX 1590. The 1% lows are weaker than expected, and the game leans too much on DLSS upscaling to reach the higher FPS. So overall, the raw performance is decent but not impressive. For a game that looks good but not groundbreaking, I expected a much better native performance. And for the next section, please stay tuned as we look into the frame rate consistency. Now moving on to the second category, frame rate consistency. This section is important because the average FPS does not always tell you how smooth a game actually feels. A game can show a decent frame rate number, but if the frame time graph is jumping all over the place, the experience can still feel uneven. For 007 First Light, the frame rate graph is actually pretty good overall. It is not perfect, and now you can see some of the spikes here and there, but most of the time the game feels fairly consistent. During regular gameplay, the movement feels smooth enough and the frame time pacing does not completely fall apart. And during transitions between gameplay and cutscenes, those are usually the moments where PC games can show you stutters, hitches, or uneven frame pacing. And in this case, 007 First Light does a decent job. Even when traversing through the level, the frame time graphs stays mostly controlled. There are small spikes here and there, but they're not happening constantly, and they're not distracting enough to ruin the experience. Combat is also better than what I expected from a frame time perspective. Even when there is a fast movement, camera turning, enemies on screen, and effects happening, the game does not feel like it's constantly hitching. The frame rate itself might not always be as high as I would like, but the pacing is more stable than raw performance numbers might suggest. Are another area I wanted to watch closely. Some games run fine during gameplay, but then stutters when moving into a cinematic, loading a new area, or changing camera angles. Here I did notice some minor spikes, but then again, nothing that felt too distracting or completely broken. So this is where I have to separate raw performance from frame time consistency. In the raw performance section, I had some criticism because the FPS should be higher and the 1% lows could be better. But for frame time consistency, the game deserves more credit because the actual frame time pacing is mostly solid. It is not a perfect 10 because the spikes are still there. You can see them on the graph. But if you're sensitive to frame pacing, you may notice small moments where the game is not completely locked in. But compared to a lot of other modern PC releases, it is not a stutter heavy mess. So for frame time consistency, I'm giving 007 First Light a 7.5 out of 10. The reason I'm scoring it slightly higher than raw performance is because even though the game is heavier than expected, the frame pacing itself is fairly controlled. It has some spikes, but they are not constant. Overall, the frame time consistency is good, but not perfect. The game still needs polishing, but this is one of the stronger parts of the PC performance so far.
Now, where were we?
Christ.
Now let's move on to the next section, which is called Visuals versus Performance Cost. For this section, I'm showing you two videos side by side. On one side, we have the ultra settings with DLAA, and on the other side, we have the optimized settings, which are mostly every setting on high, basically from ultra, but is also using DLAA anti-aliasing, so it's basically native 4K. I kept the DLAA on because I don't want DLSS upscaling to affect the comparison. The goal here is simple. If I turn the settings down from ultra to high, how much performance do I gain? And how much image quality do I lose? And judging by these scenes over here, as you can see, the FPS difference is pretty much the same, which tells me the game doesn't really scale well if you turn the settings down from ultra to high. That makes the optimization feel weaker because the game is still really heavy even after lowering the settings. This is why I'm scoring this category lower than some others. The visuals are good, but the performance return from the optimized setting is not strong enough. If high settings looked almost identical and gave me a big boost, in a much better score. But in this case, the game feels expensive to run even on lowered settings, which I hope will get fixed in future patches. And at the end of the section, you'll see the difference is pretty much negligible. Both has close to 70 FPS average, and the 1% lows are pretty much the same. It would be interesting to see when path tracing drop for this game, how the performance is going to be. And for this section, I'm dropping 007 First Light a 6.0 out of 10. Now moving on to the DLSS and frame generation quality section. This section is separate from raw performance because I'm not judging the game how it runs natively. I'm judging how well it upscales and the frame generation features. Would it actually improve the experience? And for 007 First Light, the DLSS quality is definitely the mode that makes the most sense if you want higher FPS while keeping in clean image. Compared to DLAA, DLSS quality gives a better performance target and still holds up pretty well visually. The image remains sharp and the overall presentation is clean. but during normal gameplay,
Probably.
I don't think the most players are going to notice a huge drop in image quality. But that said, DLSS is not a magic fix here. It wasn't working at all when the game launched, but now they have fixed few things with the recent updates.
Walk with me.
As you can see, there's a little bit more shimmering as we go down the DLSS settings. The performance has the most shimmering, and with frame generation, you can see there's a little bit of artifacting going on around the characters and some of the object areas. As I freeze this frame right here, you can see the artifacts shaping around the character's face right there, as you can see. So these are the small things you'll see when the frame generation is on, and it's not too distracting unless you really look for it. Now let's take a look at the multi-frame generation on this scene right here. It's one of the most beautiful scenes in the game. And as we can see, we get a very high FPS, especially for those high refresh rate monitors to max your FPS out. And now I'll let you enjoy this scene right here, and then we'll talk about and rate this section, how it did on that score.
Mind if I pop the radio on?
Why?
Blend in.
You don't need a radio to do that.
Right. No, that's what the eye patches and the wooden legs are for. How do you want to play this once we're inside?
009 is bound to be paranoid. That makes him dangerous. He's expecting us to make a move after Slovakia.
Or if not us, somebody else.
Correct. He'll be ready, so must we. But to answer your question, once we get inside, we need to get some face time with Bavna. He's the one who'll lead us to 009.
Not getting past that.
Take a right.
And if Bavma isn't an option,
I'll let you know.
I know you don't want me here. And I know what you think of me.
You do.
Insufferable, immature. Ring any bells?
So you were listening back at Ems. It's the first time for everything, eh, Bond?
So for the DLSS and FG quality section, I'm giving 007 First Light a 7.5 out of 10. It scores well because the DLSS quality looks clean, the frame generation improves smoothness, and patch 1.03 has made the game feel a little better than it did at the launch. But it loses points because the DLSS scaling is still not strong enough. And in heavier scenes, the game still feels like it needs more optimization underneath the upscaling. The technology is doing its job, but the game itself is still holding it back.
I'll think about it.
Now moving on to the final category before the overall score, that is the PC port polish. This category is not only about FPS, here I'm looking at the full PC experience. Things like setting options, upscaling support, frame generation, stability, stutter, and how well the game responds to the different hardware, and whether the port feels finished or still needs work. For 007, the PC version does have a lot of features I want to see. We have DLSS, DLAA, frame generation, and enough graphics settings to tune the experience. That is a positive, because at least the game gives PC players tools to balance the image quality and performance. But the problem is that the port does not feel fully polished yet. The biggest issue is still the optimization. The game looks good, but based on the performance I tested, it does not always run the way it should, especially on the high-end hardware like RTX 5090. When a game has this much GPU power available, I expect a strong native performance, better 1% lows, and better scaling when changing settings. The other issue is how the game reacts to different settings. Lowering graphics from ultra to high does not give a high enough boost, and DLSS setting does not also scale as cleanly as they should. That tells me that PC ports still have some underlying bottlenecks. It is not completely broken, but it does not feel fully optimized either. To be fair, the patch 1.03 does look like it improved things compared to launch. The game was in much rougher state before, and now the experience feels more stable and more playable. But even after the patch, the port still needs work. The frame pacing is almost decent, the DLSS quality looks good, and the frame generation helps, but the overall PC experience still feels heavier than it should. That is the kind of port that is playable, not fully polished. So for PC port polish, I'm giving 007 First Light a 7 out of 10. And with an overall combined score, 007 First Light gets a 7.0 out of 10. And once the path tracing comes out, I'll be testing this game on path tracing and how it does on that settings and see if the score changes. Thanks for checking out the video, and for more reviews and more gaming benchmarks, please stay tuned on Astral Gaming Benchmarks. Thanks for watching.
Just go home. Go for a run. Shake it off, she said. I'm gonna be climbing that thing, aren't I? Faster, James. Faster.